Let's start with the basics. Trade's a good thing. International trade is a good thing. How many of us get past a day without buying or using something that's come in from another country? How many of us, either ourselves or members of our immediate family, had jobs that depended on making or doing things to sell overseas? I spent 5 years as a member of the court of St Andrews University, which is effectively a board of governors. St Andrews University is one of Scotland's biggest export earners. International trade is massively important for the wealth of our university sector. For example, trade with the United States of America is a good thing. I don't know the equivalent figures for the whole of the United Kingdom, but it generates £4 billion worth of exports for Scotland alone. It supports 100,000 jobs in Scotland through investment by American companies. Trade between the major economic powers in itself is more a good thing than a bad thing. Anything that makes that trade easier, in theory, should be a good thing. If we go into a trade agreement that allows us to equalise things up the way, we should be all for it. And a lot of the trade agreements that have come out of the European Union have done that. The rationalisation of workers' terms and conditions across the European Union has been levelled up more often than it's been levelled down. That's where the Working Hours Directive has come from. That means that your boss can't make you work 142 hours a week unless you're prepared to do it. That's why the lady whose picture is over there ended up hating the European Union, because it protected the rights of workers that in some EU countries weren't being protected. So when somebody comes along and says, we've got something here that could take down unnecessary barriers for trade between the United Kingdom, the rest of the EU, and one of the biggest economic markets on the planet, possibly the biggest single economic power on the planet, we should be willing to have a look at it. But, and the but is where we really need to look. I think there's a few key questions we've got to ask ourselves when we're talking about international trade. What is international trade for? I think Geraint kind of hinted at that. Or maybe we should be saying, who's it for? Who is the current system of worldwide trade really designed to benefit? Who is it that gets the benefits of all this trade, and who is it that pays the cost of the downside? If TTIP could be used in the same way as EU free trade agreements to start equalising up the conditions of service of workers in Europe and in America, if we could use it to start equalising up safety standards and environmental sustainability standards, it would be a good thing. Do we seriously think that's what the EU Commission and the American government are planning to do with it? I have my doubts about that. There's got to be a danger that what's being teed up to be based on the kind of myth that the way to solve poverty is to create half a dozen ultra super mega billionaire rich people, and somehow the benefits will filter down to the ordinary plebs like me and you. It doesn't happen like that. There are more billionaires in the United Kingdom now than there have ever been, and there are more people in poverty in the United Kingdom than there have been for at least the last 100 years, and possibly longer. So allowing the rich to get super rich doesn't help ordinary people to get by. The second area of major concern, and again it's one that Geraint has mentioned, is not so much TTIP itself, but the machinery that already exists, the investor-state dispute settlement process. Worryingly, that's being used a lot more now than it has been in the past. I think the companies are trying it on now so that if TTIP comes into force, they will know how to work the system. The lawyers will have been practiced in finding the right arguments to use. If it creates a regulatory regime, or maybe a non-regulatory regime we should call it, that limits the rights of national governments, national parliaments, to take domestic policy decisions in the best interests of the people that elected them, then it's something that I think we have got to be prepared to draw a line in the sand in and say this is not going to be allowed to happen. For me, it's of particular relevance to major public services. The Scottish Government have been trying everything possible, not only to prevent further privatisation of our services, but to reverse the trend in a lot of ways. They've reversed a lot of the privatisations of support services in the NHS, for example. It's now hospitals are not allowed to privatise their cleaning and catering services. If TTIP comes in, are we still going to be able to do that? I don't know. It's not a question of direct public provision is good and private provision is bad. It's a question of who is it should be allowed to take the choice, to take the decision. The reason that if the bill goes, I'm not going to be charging over to the Chamber, is because the House of Commons just now is discussing legislation that only affects England. And I don't think it's for me to decide how much power London should devolve to the cities and regions of England. I certainly don't want lawyers in Hong Kong or Japan or California telling my Scottish Government when they have to privatise and when they can't privatise. The position of the Scottish Government just now is that if TTIP increases the likelihood of them being forced to accept privatisation of key public services, then the Scottish Government will not support it under any circumstances, regardless of what the potential benefits might be in terms of better competitiveness for industry, job creation, economic growth, and so on. Finally, there's the whole concern about secrecy. I'm told, I haven't been able to confirm it, but I'm told that until quite recently, members of the European Parliament weren't allowed to see the draft agreement. And when they were allowed to see it, they get put into a locked room, got given a copy of it, weren't allowed to take notes, weren't allowed to copy it. Somebody stood and watched them reading it, they were expected to memorise it, and once they got out, they weren't allowed to tell anybody what they had read. And these are the people that are supposed to be the sort of supreme governing body of the European Union. The European Commission have assured us it's nothing to worry about. The UK government are assuring us it's nothing to worry about. You can take those assurances or give those assurances whatever way you'd like to, but without making sort of party political points, because I don't know if there's anybody here to respond to them. I tend not to treat Her Majesty's government as being the most firm assurance about the fairness of trade agreements that could have. I'd rather have assurance from somewhere else. Earlier on this year, there was a brief debate in the Commons Chamber on TTIP, and probably sort of the briefest exchange of that debate, but potentially the most interesting, was when somebody said, instead of having a treaty that covers absolutely everything and then having to fight tooth and nail to pull back out the bits that we don't want to be included, why not do it the other way around? In July, we had what's termed an adjournment debate in the House of Commons, which is people put their names into a raffle, for want of a better word, and if your name is picked out, you get to lead a debate for half an hour after the official end of business. And one of my colleagues, Tasmina Sheikh, who I think at one point had hoped to be here tonight, drew a debate on TTIP. One of the very short but interesting interventions or exchanges during that debate was when somebody said, why can't we have, instead of having a TTIP that is set up to cover absolutely and literally everything, and then we have to try and argue to take the health service out of it, or to take our water services out of it, or to take our schools out of it, why not set up a framework that is there to be used, and then we can agree piece by piece about what kinds of business, what kinds of industry, what kinds of sector of the economy we're prepared to see being covered by it. So there's an opt-in provision the whole time, and it's much more difficult to force an opt-in that we don't want rather than to try and achieve an opt-out that somebody else may not want. And for me, that's possibly the single biggest change I would like to see to the whole direction of TTIP that's going in just now. I don't want to reject it out of hand. I think if we get it right, it could significantly boost the economy in the United Kingdom and other parts of Europe. It can significantly boost the economy in the United States. It can create a better standard of living a lot more widely than we might expect from an agreement between two Northern Hemisphere superpowers. I don't want to throw that chance away simply because we're worried about what might happen, but the assurances that we've had so far have not been assurances. The European Commission tell us we can rely on the European Commission not to mess it up, and we know we can rely on the European Commission because the European Commission tell us we can rely on the European Commission. No, that's just not quite enough. We have had assurances that nothing will happen without the approval of the House of Commons and possibly of the House of Lords as well. But we need to make absolutely sure that that applies, and we also need to make sure that if it does come to a vote in the House of Commons, that we all know exactly what it is we're being asked to sign up to. My kind of feeling from a completely different place, Geraint and I both sit on the EU Scrutiny Committee in here, and a few weeks ago we had the EU Minister in answering questions. I get the distinct impression from what he said that the government actually see successful delivery of TTIP as a major plus in their negotiations of the EU treaty. I don't know what planet they're living on, because most people I speak to don't see TTIP as a benefit of EU membership, certainly not with the secrecy that surrounds it just now. Part of my concern as somebody who believes that we should remain in the European Union, change the European Union from inside, rather than walk away and lose all the benefits. Okay. I worry that the government may have so misjudged the mood of people on TTIP that they might actually destroy any chance of a vote to remain in the EU by making it look as if TTIP is coming to get us. So, to summarise, from my point of view, and I think, unless Nicola Sturgeon's changed her mind recently, I think it represents the view of the Scottish Government. We see it as a potential opportunity to create jobs, to create employment, to boost our economy, to enhance the standard of living of our people. We don't want to reject it out of hand. If the cost of that is that we lose the right to decide what gets privatised and doesn't get privatised in our public sector, then that is a cost that is far too high to bear